Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith. This is episode 118. What we're going to do tonight is called Richard Hernandez. Topic is group dynamics. Richard called me up and said, hey, let's have a conversation. He's trying to do some projects within Canada related to just that group dynamics, get more people on the court because tennis has become so expensive, among other reasons. But let's call Richard up. He was on our podcast before, a great guy. Richard is from everywhere. Born in Trinidad, went to school in Italy, went to school in England, went to school in the United States. He's been in Canada a long, long time. I've known Richard 40 years, maybe 37, 38. But let's call the young boy up. Dialing, Canada. Toronto, Canada, home of the Maple Leafs. Richard.
Good evening, Mr. Smith.
Richard Hernandez, Toronto. I just told our listeners our topic. We'll get rolling on this. Group dynamics. Tell us your thoughts on why that's so important. I just touched about it briefly. Just one is the cost of tennis, getting more people on one court.
Well, here's some thoughts. We, in our climate, obviously, getting into Canada, and we had our first major snowfall today, so most of the outdoor courts are shut down, and everybody's headed inside because of the cold weather. So in Toronto specifically, the cost of real estate is through the roof. Access to courts is very challenging. So, as always, the most experienced players, the ones that can afford it, have first dibs. So I think, the topic today is to really get to how it can benefit communities at large. And I think this is something that has to be discussed and developed, and to get to the point where it's trained at a much higher level than what's being done today, so that we can affect tennis, specifically in Canada, but more importantly around the world, in developing countries, etc. So, no, it's an important topic, and I think it's one way that we can further the cause of better tennis coaching.
Yeah, I know you have some notes. I have some notes. We already talked about it briefly, but in a lot of ways, we've already lived it. Group dynamics, 7,200 square feet. I know in Canada, obviously that's heated and lighted space. It certainly applies to outdoor tennis as well. More so indoors, obviously, because you just think when the snow flies, you mentioned snow already. It's November 15th, our recording date. So you have a long, long winter. During the pandemic, numbers have increased for the most part in tennis. Is that true with your club in your area?
Correct. So just the way the pandemic unfolded, and there was a sort of transition back to normalcy, the few sports that were allowed to open up first, golf, because in the time of year when we were returning during the spring, we were returning back to normal, was permitted to open first, and then tennis quickly followed. And that was based on in keeping with the protocols and guidance for safe distance, etc. Right? So when that happened, people obviously flocked to those two activities, and tennis has been on the upswing ever since. Most of the indoor courts, courts are close to 100% capacity, definitely in the 90s, and that's from the time they open to the time they close. They're very limited, sort of what they call non-prime time hours now, and it's something we have to contend with. I mean, it's just another just another challenge for tennis to overcome. But, this is what we're talking about in terms of group dynamics today is one way that we can sort of help alleviate and get more people involved in a safe, affordable, and hopefully, if it's done correctly, we don't waste anybody's time in terms of development time. A child's time is precious, and the learning curve that can occur and or that happens, and we want to make sure that from my standpoint, your standpoint, that we do the best delivery of information as possible. And I think this is a great forum for us to sort of push that message across, I guess.
No, I think there's so many there's just so many positives with group dynamics to get more people on the court. As you just said, first dibs, the established players, those programs are going to be laid out, whether it's ladies leagues or junior development in the afternoon. With pros have their so-called clientele. I think one thing that happened during the pandemic was very revealing. There were so many people giving lessons, say, in indoor space like a garage. And when I say revealing, once again, sound like doom and gloom, but the lessons, the information given out, Vic Braden used to say, could you shut up and give me a lesson? People were rolling their racket on the ball and tapping the ball up and down, and it wasn't grip, swing, body, in teaching technique. With that, I think from a tennis teaching standpoint, we used to say years ago that everybody agreed on the ready position, and from there it became very confusing. I would say today, right, people don't agree on the ready position. It's a safe bet if you go to a tournament. It could be a pro tournament for that matter, but a junior tournament, 7 out of 10 kids easily. That's a safe bet. When they're in the ready position, the racket's not going to be centered. They're going to be waiting with like a semi-Western or Western grip. The racket's going to be angled downward. The racket's not going to be in a neutral position. So I think it's so important, get everybody the expression. They say on the same page. I come back with the players, the teachers. They're not even from the same book. I mean, the old comment, can we agree the tennis court's a rectangle, that water runs downhill? But I do think with group dynamics, first thing comes to my mind is get a whistle. You have to have command of the group, but you also have to have command of tennis, command of the knowledge of the game. But I think 3 goals, acquiring athletic skills. You and I talked about that before going on air, throwing, catching, just basic push-ups, sit-ups, leg lifts. But acquiring athletic skill, learning cooperative skills, just how to get along, how to have a partner, and how to formulate teams. And then, lastly, a good start in tennis. And actually the way tennis works, kids need to do so much technical work. I spent a lot of time in Moscow, and it's really interesting. So many of the indoor facilities in Moscow, there's one court that's just designated for becoming an athlete. They have gymnastic equipment. That also could be done. That gets into a little bit more expense. But besides having teaching aids for tennis, but to have equipment to make people a better athlete.
Right.
But go ahead. What are the comments you want to start with?
Yeah. So here's some thoughts though. Why to really have a little more focus on group dynamics for whom? And the obvious sort of look at schools, right? People want to, schools are the first thing, the largest groups, etc. But really, when it comes down to, I was walking by a school just the other day, and they had a rec break or a recess break, and before they went inside, I saw the teacher line the kids up along the wall, and just went through some calisthenics, some jumping jacks, etc., before they were allowed to walk back into the classroom. And when it comes down to sort of education and phys ed classes, really here in Canada, those classes have sort of been, minimized or not cut, but they're not as prevalent. And I think part of it is the actual cost of having an additional teacher specifically for phys ed, but also the space is very expensive to build, develop, maintain. But, you and I also spoke about, the different places where tennis can be taught, right? So, if we were to focus just say on phys ed, teacher training, universities offer teacher training classes. And one of the things that, we spoke about Sunday was when I was at Tennis Tech, the program that you designed and directed in the early mid-'80s. I was there the latter part of 86, 87. You offered a lab for 100 plus active students in the Tennis Tech program. You offered phys ed classes to the general student body. You offered after-school community programs to the juniors in Tyler, Texas. So in a given day, if you just add it all up, I mean, probably you could have seen at least 300-400 people in a day just based on those numbers that I just identified for you. So, coming back to teacher training, it would be great if we could, leverage what we understand with group dynamics and then get the governing bodies to support a direct teacher training program with GreatBase information. I think it's important that, teachers are given information, language, starter kits, speaking points, that they're not fumbling through it or, as you just described, bogus activities that don't relate to long-term development. I mean, if, for example, if people understood the ready position, the importance of it, the framework by which it helps everything else, in terms of ground strokes, volleys, approach shots, return to serve, lobs, drop shots. If people understood that and just were adamant that, you could deliver on the ready position into a unit turn, into a shoulder turn, as a teacher, tennis would go a long way to further develop. And I honestly think that is not pie in the sky stuff. I think it's very doable, but it just takes a little bit of determination, a little bit of directive. I think that, in speaking to the Ontario Tennis Association, and hopefully I get the chance to speak with the powers to be at Tennis Canada, that they realize there is, just look at some of Canada's better players, the ready position of Felix, the ready position of Dennis, the ready position of Bianca, the ready position of Layla, and the similarities are striking, efficient, and powerful. And I think that if you just use those four examples, they're young, they're vibrant, you could further tennis right now very quickly in a multitude of venues, a multitude of locations, a multitude of, communities. I mean, I've got notes here. I've got, where would you do this for whom? You would do it in schools. You would do it in community centers. You would undertake them with municipal organizations. And then perhaps the clubs would benefit with further development, right? So it really is a feeder system to begin with. Good group dynamics. It's a good feeder system by which we can get everybody involved. But at the same time, I think it's a great way for coaches to develop teaching skills. I think that when a coach can go out there and command a group, there was a coach I sort of studied under the National Coaching Institute, Andy Higgins. And one of the sort of mottos or sayings that he had was, at the time, there was this push on being athlete-centered. coach from the position of being athlete centered, focus on the athlete. And he would counter that with, I'd rather you be a directive coach, right? Coach as a coach. Use your wisdom, use your skills, direct, push with the focus on the athlete, but not the reverse. Allowing the athlete to sort of, run the practice. That's not what this is about. Group dynamics can't afford that. Group dynamics is, as we discussed, it's a cultural development side of teaching tennis. You've got a large group, and you've got to be very, very directive with them. So I think this is a great way for coaches to develop.
I think with, you mentioned the word community, the word culture. It's really one and the same. Several weeks ago, Caleb Hyatt, we had him on as a guest on the podcast, and obviously dedicated coach to take 2 weeks of his time and come and just observe what we're doing day to day. But I did tell him, it wasn't like he really saw large group dynamics, which to me would be large numbers. Going back on a couple of things you said with Dennis Vandermeer, his name will come up throughout this conversation for sure. To me, I've never seen anybody who was better with group dynamics than Dennis Vandermeer. With Vic Braden, he was so entertaining and had so much information. Many times Vic would do a traveling clinic. He'd teach one student, and 50 people were just happy to just sit there and watch. Not that he didn't have the skill set to, obviously, he was ingenious. He was a genius in the way he set up his tennis teaching program, or his tennis school. Time Magazine called it the best tennis teaching facility in creation. And I used to say about the Braden place, his tennis facility, that the tennis teachers were so spoiled. They roll out the balls, especially like let's say in a beautiful indoor court, air conditioned. You roll the courts out. But I've taught tennis where you walk around the corner and you don't really know where you're going to teach. Teach in a cafeteria, teach in a hallway. But one thing that Vandermeer, again, touching on some of the things you said, was he would tell people, you need to go watch elementary school teachers. You want to be a really good tennis teacher, you need to go and watch people work with large groups. He also used to compliment, the training that's done in the military. But here's a quick Vandermeer story. You were part of that program I was there 10 years, where we studied tennis teaching, and Dennis would tell the students. And so if we had 100 of them, you just do the math. I was hoping, I have my fingers crossed that he would just say 3, but one time he said 5. He told the students training for occupational competencies, tennis teaching, pro managers, you have to bring 5 students tonight. And if you can't bring 5 students, it wasn't very nice to librarians. He said, you need to get out of tennis and become a librarian. So, you do the math, we have 600 people on the courts. But in a given day, those Tyler, Texas, when we say after school program, we just really had guinea pigs. We didn't have a junior development program. That was when the team was practicing. But we did have juniors, but that was a small number, no more than 10. And then, the PE classes. So 100, the community class on Tuesday and Thursday was 80. It would be close to 200 people per day. But you got to teach everybody to teach. Everybody to teach with, having visual demonstrators. That's where there has to be a connection. We used to call it the train. The caboose is the tiny tots, the early childhood development. The 18s need to pull the 16s, 16s need to pull the 14s. It's really become too cliquey, where it's too much one-on-one, too many privates.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's one of the saddest things in tennis, when you go out there and you see 7,200 square feet, being occupied by 2 people. And then it's infuriating when you see one-on-one and the lesson is absolutely horrible. It's infuriating. It's so upsetting. So, it's not to stand on the soapbox, but it's skill acquisition. I think that's one of the things I wanted to sort of touch base with you on, is that Richmond Hill, how the class began and how the class ended, was, much in the way that coaches learning would get the most training, you know. And that's where, you know, when you think about group dynamics, even a junior program, I mean, how many junior programs have, you know, moments where the students, you know, self-feed, talk to one another, self-evaluate, coach one or teach one, instruct one another, show and tell, speak in front of a group. Quite often we get the youngest kids lead in stroke review. You know, 30, 40, 50 kids standing behind them. You've got a 6, 7-year-old lead in stroke review, speaking, you know, demonstrating. It's a great way for, and then parents looking through the window would be, you know, in awe of the discipline that's demonstrated for those exercises to take place. Because obviously, go ahead.
I was just going to say, not to interrupt, you know, I apologize for interrupting. The picture of that, there's so many things to share with that. I think about Ivan Goolagong, amazing player. There was Roger Federer, so graceful. Before Roger, Ivan would be on that list. You know, Wimbledon champion, as a mother as well. She won Wimbledon twice. But she was coached by Vic Edwards. And, you know, in her book, she said she hated the beginning and the end of practice where they would just stand in one place and shadow swing all the basic shots. But I think what happens with many tennis programs is they market to the kid. Let's make it fun. Let's create the repeat business where they want to come back. But I think that what needs to happen is that tennis programs need to market to the parent. You know, the consumer needs to become educated so they really know what they're looking at. And if you can do that where it's not stratified, where you definitely have, say, the 18-year-olds, the best juniors in the club, I wouldn't create a scholarship, but I would create a student assistantship that allows them to be on the court. The highest form of retention for learning is to teach. And they're out there and they know everybody's name. It's not like, okay, the beginning players at a tennis program, no one knows who they are but the other beginning players. They can start together, they can finish together, say up north where you are in the summertime when the courts open up. You know, obviously there has to be compatibility factors. You can't have an 18-year-old train with an 8-year-old all day long, but they certainly can take 5 to 7 minutes in the beginning, 5 to 7 minutes at the end.
100%. Well, and the other thing about coaching development, I mean, you know, quite often you go to a certification program or a seminar, and the amount of agreement in the room, polite agreement, it's incredible. Very rarely, I've never seen it, but very rarely is there an opportunity for coaches to present their skills, present their information, other than in a lecture format, and then take questions at the end. Very rarely do I see coaches get in front of a group and, you know, perform, coach, entertain, and educate, you know, at the same time teaching another student. And that's something that, you know, obviously, I remember going to when you first moved to Rochester, you're setting up that program, and the parents, the students that were in the program before you led it were all in attendance. And I believe you had Connor McHale, Julie Scott, I want to say Michelle Greenwood, and a few others from our program in front. And then you would have also students that were going to be part of the junior program at Rochester follow. And, you know, within a short space of time, you had a significant amount of learning taking place, and it was entertaining. And, you know, that's where I think, you know, I'll use the word, you know, combative. I think coaching has to have a bit of a rebirth, and by fire. I mean, you really got to get in front of other coaches and combat this and fight it, and obviously be respectful, But I think coaches have got to expose themselves to moments like that where they're learning through trial, not just through trial and error, but through direct, combative. This is what you do. This is what I have criticism with. This is what I do. This is what you have criticism with. Let's get down to it. I think that's missing in tennis. I think you watch some of the commentary that takes place when it comes to hockey and football. The ideas are certainly discussed, and sometimes very passionately. And you listen to tennis commentary, and it's all agreement. It's all entertainment agreement. I think that's something that's lost in our development. We just don't have it, and I think we need more of it. I think group dynamics, you get a larger group to witness, coaching, training. It's so powerful. I think it's just to bear witness for juniors is so important. Other than just the final product, do they win or lose? There's so many variables for somebody to win and lose. One opponent, how good is that student really beating the other student? Or other player. There's too much to that get lost, and it would be very good if we could get group training, larger group dynamics to bear witness to real development. And I think that's another benefit to large group training is you actually do see improvement. You actually do see development if it's done correctly. Obviously, if it's not done correctly. Go ahead.
Sorry again. With the see history, this is where the player started. This is where the player is now. You mentioned Rochester, New York, for our listeners, Tennis Corporation of America. We'll have to ask Doug Cash. He'd be a great guest. He's certainly on a different side of tennis than you and I have been. I would say that he's a briefcase guy. He knows so much about tennis business, which is so important. But, I'm a ball hopper guy. I know you're a ball hopper guy. I remember Doug, he made a comment to me one time. He goes, well, it was amazing what you did here, but I don't know if anybody else could pull it off. How could somebody else pull it off? But I think that's where the development of the coach has to come in. And I think we can go through that. How do you make that happen? But you mentioned some names. We had Jeremy Wertzman on. He became #1 in the NCAAs as a coach at Indiana. But I had filmed him and skill tested him. He was ranked 3 in the East. And this is documented in our course, Tennis Intelligence Applied. We have so many pre-posts, but that's just one that is on that particular course. It shows Jeremy at a young age, his backhand volley. And actually, it was the second filming was done in Toronto, but he's a native of Rochester. But I called you up. It was Michelle Green when I said, hey, you need to drive around Lake Ontario and bring Michelle down. And it worked out perfectly where, I think he was 11 and she was 10, might have been 10 and 9, but I'd like to say it was the best of 5, but it was one set, and the younger player, the girl, won, and that was more convincing. And I think that's unfortunate, but you have to persuade. I don't really like that. Well, do you buy it? Do you believe in it? Do you believe in gravity? But Julie Scott, she came up. We have that on video as well, and that was a wow factor because she went to Stanford. And she did very, very well at Stanford. I know Clayton Stanley, who you spent so much time with, she really never conquered the serve. She'd gone so many, by the time she was in junior high, she totally rebuilt her game. And I know Clayton said, her serve was just never, if she had started with the serve when she was really, really young. And we can get into throwing positions, but to have that all documented, to document development. So if something, I remember doing that with Dave Anderson. Dave Anderson and I went to your club and so coming back to Doug Cash, how do you create that culture? Well, it's labor intensive. The first thing you have to do is you got to film everybody. And then people will say, well, they start to look at it cross-eyed. Well, you're talking about group dynamics with all these beginners on a court, and you got to film everybody. You don't have to do that when someone's a complete beginner. But if they played some tennis, you want to film them. And then the other thing is you want to skill test and all of the things that we do during an assessment. But just imagine if a tennis club, you didn't have to become a member at first. You could just have a trial membership and come out, and one court was just designated to teaching beginners the basics. But that, I was rereading an article because we have someone who's going to be helping us with distributing content. Very quickly, a story people have heard before, but Christo Schultz, his dad, Bud Schultz, top 40 player in the world, never played one junior tournament. Christo is the head coach, men's team, I believe, at Brandeis. So he was at Harvard, but he took some time away from school. Later went back, got his degree, but he had to come and learn how to teach tennis. That was approved. Got it with Dave Fish and such. But incognito, Christo, we still have the film. He filmed 50 boys, 50 girls from behind on the serve and from behind on the forehand. We never revealed anybody's names. No one really knew what we were doing. And over 90% of the players had palm-up serve or a version of palm-up, and over 90% Western grip or close to it on the forehand side. That's nationals. And it was done where it was at the time at the Delray Beach Tennis Center where one of our former students was the director. And so there were several people that we had there because it was national 12s and coaches and such. And parents, if you just do us a favor, watch 10 points. And there were 7 overheads hit in 1,000 points. They said, just watch 1,000 points. And they did that as a group. So, it's one of those things, stop the bleeding. People are not learning how to play from the get-go. I think that, no substitute for a good beginning. That's a theme from Braden. You've already touched upon it with the word entertainment, enjoyment. We always said the 3 E's of a lesson: education, exercise, enjoyment. And I think it's an enjoyable experience to have all the young people on one court learning everybody's names. And you do have to make sure that there's exercise. And actually, of the 3, Vandermeer used to always say that you got to camouflage the education. You got to have them have fun where they they don't even know that, okay, they're slowing down. But that comes down to the arsenal, the tricks of the trade. You don't necessarily know the trade, but you have to go out there in group dynamics and you have to have a few tricks. You can't, that's where you have to be mentored as a coach. You're not going to have great group dynamic skills when you're an entry-level pro. And I think what happens with so many beginners is they're given a beginning instructor. It's a blind leading the blind. You see these little tennis for tots classes, and they're not important, and they're low maintenance, and everybody can confuse an 8-year-old, 7-year-old, and they put people teaching them that really have no teaching background. So it's usually just the opposite. The kids who have really good playing skills. Julian Krinsky, somebody else we need to get on this podcast, he does a great job going, because he coached a little bit on the pro tour. He goes, it was a little boring for me, and he just stands there hugging his racket and pretend he's watching a ball go back and forth. I'd like to just throw this out. You can talk about the money side of it more. Is here in the States, it's basically the number now is $100 an hour. Everybody's charging $100 an hour. It's the money grab. Somebody's 20 years old and it's $100 an hour. But where you are been based for so many years now, decades, it's the cost of the coach, but also the cost of the court. Correct?
Correct. Well, I mean, again, cost of living. I mean, it's there. It's in your face every day. The price of a liter of gas now is it's jumped between $1.60 Canadian to $1.80 Canadian. That's for 1 liter. A gallon of gas, U.S. gallon, has gone as high as $6, I believe, down there in some states. So, I mean, the cost of living, the cost of housing, the cost of food, it all comes back to, who gets the opportunity. For $100, it's not. I don't know where it is on the socioeconomic scale, but it's up there, and that's the unfortunate truth in our sport. Tennis associations are placating, developing the sport for essentially those who can afford it. That they really aren't doing a good enough job developing the sport for those who are struggling or couldn't support it. And I'm not saying that should be the priority, but it has to be an important facet for social development. Tennis Canada has gone out on a limb, and they've got projects to develop more indoor courts. And they're trying to do that with partnerships with municipalities and the private sector. So, partner one has, the investment to put up an air structure, an air bubble, and it averages, say, around $2 million. Obviously, it's not $2 million cash, but they leverage for that amount. And Tennis Canada supports with a grant of sorts. So they're pushing for these new indoor courts, and they're calling it affordable tennis. But the truth is, Steve, if you drive into the parking lot, this is not, the socioeconomic group that needs the support. I mean, you see Teslas, BMWs, etc. And, my argument to doing it this way, without doing programs in concert for making tennis affordable, is that you're providing a country club experience environment on public land. So $100 an hour, yeah, that might be the number. If you look a little bit deeper, you've got issues with, public assets being supported by municipal governments for those who can already afford, private clubs. I just think that it's a little bit it could be down the road cannibalistic. I think you've got to develop programs for those clubs. I think you've got to develop the right programs in concert with those clubs. You just can't develop the club and hopefully the program develops itself. It doesn't work that way, in my opinion. I think you've got to really spend a lot of time thinking through this. And I'm not here to upset anybody. What I'm saying is not to upset anybody, but you've got to speak truth if you're going to get a real solution. You can't avoid the truth, as you've always said. The truth can hurt, but you've got to look at the truth to get a viable, meaningful, long-term solution to player development. And $100 an hour for one kid to take a terrible lesson is not the right direction. And you and I will agree on that. You and I will support one another, but it really needs to be understood by those who have the power to make the changes. And I think that's something that it just needs to be said, and it needs to be dealt with appropriately without upsetting anybody. But you can't take a public asset without really affecting the entire gamut of the public, the entire cross-section, the socioeconomic section of the public. It's a public asset. Therefore, I believe it should be done in such a way that the public have access to good programming and not just, the experience of playing tennis or picking up a racket or bouncing a ball, but, real instruction. And I think that has to be said, and I think it has to be battled for, fought for. And I think that's now's the time. Now's the time when tennis is at its peak. Now is the time. Don't wait for it to simmer down or lose its wind. Now's the time to really put the pressure on it and make tennis truly accessible in a meaningful way. And I think the group dynamics is a great avenue. And I think that your experience, there's a number of coaches you've trained are capable. It's just something that can be dealt with today, and we can start discussion in the format that we're talking about now, and then develop our thoughts further, and articulate our thoughts so that those who are hearing it with the decision-making power will buy in. And I think that's something that I wanted to sort of, when I started this conversation with you on Sunday, I wanted to further it in a meaningful way. I don't think we can keep criticizing just the tennis teaching I think we've got to be very cognizant that, where the money is spent. I mean, you go to Florida, that National Tennis Center, Orlando, it's fantastic. But do they see 300, 400 students a day? Like, really, from the community? I don't know. I'm asking, right? So, if you're going to spend that kind of money, and placate to those who already can play the sport and have access to courts and the best training and the best equipment, right, and the best travel budgets, I don't know if you're really helping tennis out. I think that you've got to make it. There's diamonds out there that they're just getting buried in lost with time. The fantastic kids that want to learn. I mean, most kids, will honestly give you a response to, I believe I need more discipline in my life. I believe with better discipline, I have a better chance. Most kids will tell you the truth on that. They wouldn't say I need less discipline. They say I need more discipline. And, if that's the case, if kids actually recognize it, if kids actually see that as a viable way for them to develop, then I don't know what we're doing by not providing that possibility, that opportunity. And I think, group dynamics, large group training forces that. You talk about military training, it forces that thinking, that behavior where, a young child will develop behaviors that are substantial if it's repeated day after day after day after day for a long time. And I think that's something that, group dynamics, the culture of group dynamics, the culture of group training in that format gives everybody that sense of, I can do it this way. I can spend time, isolated, slowing down, self-evaluating without rolling my eyes, without thinking, this is boring. It really isn't if you really get the idea and the education behind the purpose of it. And I think it's got to go in that direction. Now, most clubs today can afford, 3 to 4 hours of junior program a day up here. That's nowhere near enough. We're not keeping up with the United States, right? So while we've got, a great national program in Montreal in terms of court access and travel opportunities, it's not possible for the average competitive student to get the type of training for them to be very good or competitive, even at the college level. We're losing out. We're losing possibilities. And I think that something has to be done and understood and changed for kids who can't afford private lessons to go to a stroke of the week on the forehand side, on the serve, on the overhead, and on the backhand side, and review in a meaningful way, and then go home and repeat it in a meaningful way, and then go back again. And you see that if you can just visualize, you can see that there's going to be some real development with young people, and the discipline behind that is fantastic. So my only remark to my only point to this, and I've gone on for a bit, is where is it that $100 should win the day? $100 should win the day on one court. That makes no sense to me. And I mean, I don't want to get, too preachy about it, but it certainly is. It's upsetting that, somebody who can afford $100 will detract from so many other people getting an opportunity to learn and develop without taking that into account. Take your $100 lesson, fine. The truth is, how do we get more people involved in tennis in a meaningful way? And that has to have, some real discussion and some real planning and some real effort.
Well, I think to make a real critical study of tennis, you've already touched upon it. I want to come back to a word that you mentioned several times, truth. The truth will set you free. But with owners, I can tell story after story. We started this segment, Steve's Stories. Use my name in third person. Someone said, "Did you run out of stories?" And I said, no, I haven't run out of stories. But during a recession many years ago, I was in Chicago, and I met with the owners of this large indoor club. And it was it was a Saturday. I was there typically I was at a place for 4 days. And I said, well, let's just review what one coach did. One coach came in and he gave 8 private lessons. And I said, it would have been much better if the 8 people came for the entire day. Pack a lunch, which people don't do anymore. Bring your computer, which I put it in my backpack. And then find a way in that indoor club. I walk through indoor clubs and go, okay, where's your classroom setting? And they don't have one. I said, well, you got to create one. Certainly you can generate more revenue. The bottom line is the bottom line. It is a business. But I said, the pro, if he had the skill set, he could have the 8 players come for the entire day. And sure enough, they could have been charged a little bit more than they were for the private lesson, but they'd be there for the whole day. And, a lot of times on the business side, the overhead has nothing to do with being on the tennis court and being up at the net. It's just the overhead is the overhead. But I think to get people clicking together, so you have coaches to make a critical study, the term teacher, instructor, coach, trainer, whatever it is many times the more established coach is the one who's, they're thriving, they're working with a kid, they just go out and they're a glorified or they're a experienced sparring partner. But how much teaching is actually going on and how much competitive play? It's just like when people play 6-player doubles, 3 points, or I should say 3 players on one side, 3 players on the other side. It's obviously 2 against 2, but you rotate, and there's so many different scoring formats. If you chart that, more people can play, or more points are played with 6 people on a court than 4. So there needs to be a skill set. There needs to be creativity. Coming back to truth. And I know you have too. Now decades of experience. We have some boys here from Montreal, and one of them, maybe both of them, but one of them was as a 12-year-old a Quebec champion, provincial champion, and never went to the net. Now we're helping him with college placement. He's a very good tennis player. He's getting better. A few things here, a few things there. He'll be a 12 on the UTR, and that's a pretty good tennis player. But with the truth, you played tennis the wrong way for years and years. Doubles. Did you serve and stay back? And what a lot of teenagers don't realize is that the brain is so powerful, so sophisticated. They're still playing like they're in the 12s. All you have to do is look at a kid's contact point. Certain a lot of times the grip will predicate that, but they're backing up. They're going the wrong way. They're backing up, and when the ball bounces, it is the same height as the paint on the court. But again, the truth. When you think about some beginners coming out, they're just starting. Who are they going to meet? The presentation in the 3rd grade information presentation, show and tell. Like you're saying, and you obviously do that indoor, outdoor. When you say look through the window, you do have much more of a captive audience. I think just because of the weather, people drive to an indoor club, and you do have the parents watching more at an indoor club than an outdoor club. But what are they watching? I think at the end of a practice session, it's not like, okay, let's have a technical review. This is, years ago, tennis teachers were trained. What homework do you give out? Are your kids training every day in front of a mirror? What type of routines do you give out? And, but I think, and I know if you teach strokes, you can do this really well. I know Dave Anderson, we talk about Dave quite a bit. They call it 3-zone doubles, and the juniors play with the adults, and it's done quite well for sure because people are taught how to hit the ball. But it's that drill where 2 people are on one side and maybe a 6 or 8 on the other side. You feed in a ground stroke, you play the point out, 2-on-2 doubles, and if you win, you tag up to the baseline. And then if you feed an approach out, if you win that. Or they may even do it with approach out of volley and over it. But you play 3 points. If you win 3 points, you run to the other side. Some college tennis teams do that as a warm-up. And it's fun. And you can actually look through the glass at an indoor club, and there's like 4 courts in a bay. And at the end, everybody's on one court. And there's 3 empty courts sitting there. with group dynamics, I grew up on an everyday basis with a father who was a hobby coach and 3 older brothers. Every day, in the wintertime for sure, it was like, how effective was the coach using the ice surface during practice? And so much ice time is wasted if the coach doesn't have the skill set. Now,
Right.
7,200 square feet. If you just go from the from the baseline to the fence, that's 2 stations with lots of space. I mean, you can create a classroom. You can just create so many different stations. You don't have to have all the bells and whistles. I mean, it'd be nice to have a portable backboard, have cones. We say socks. What we mean with socks, for our listeners, if you take 3 balls and old tennis balls, and you put it in a tube sock, athletic sock, baseball sock, whatever you want to call it, and it's a great drill for the serve. And I certainly will reprimand people I've trained. Speaking of Doug Cash, he once said, "Can't use my name in third person." Once you're a student of Steve Smith, you're a student of his the rest of your life, whether you want to be or not. Because I'm going to watch how their students hit the ball. It just takes a New York minute. But if I'm teaching someone, I've taught someone to teach tennis, and I am invited to their club, which, to be gracious, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I show up, and they have no socks. I go, they're not doing a very good job teaching the serve. Or if there's just 3 or 4 of them, you need to have a basket. You need to have like 300 socks in a big program with multiple courts.
Yeah.
And, then you need to, I think that's Dennis Vandermeer, Be Your Brother's Keeper, Daniel Coyle's book, The Little Book of Talent. What's in your bag? You need to have that book, The Little Book of Talent. But do you have a sock in your bag? Can a tennis kid have that sock with the 3 balls? You say, okay, take your sock out. They should have their own sock. And if they don't, that's the mistake of the tennis teacher. The tennis teacher needs to, just accountability.
100%.
But with a couple of things on group dynamics, granted, you have to go out and teach people to throw and catch, the athletic skills, the coordination skills. You can be clever. Okay, toss underhand, catch on 1 ball, bounce, catch on 2, catch on 3. Vandermeer used to teach the unit turn, the pivot, and when you toss a ball, you're going through the body mechanics of, say, a forehand. With finding out, if you teach the serve first, you don't have to even worry about creating partners. You can look around, and you need to be able to think on your feet. You need to be able to manufacture your thought process. So if we're going to go with the serve first. We're not even going to use tennis rackets. We're going to teach people to throw.
Right.
And then also too is if you say, okay, we're going to do it right-handed and left-handed, because people, with my lefty and my righty, a lot of young kids don't know. We're going to do it both ways. And your advanced players or somebody who's played a little bit more, it's okay. Let's see you do it with your opposite hand. So you just need to challenge them, and you can take the kid who's you can put them back in a cognitive state where they have to reprocess. They're righty, and you're making them do it lefty. The trick with Vandermeer, you shake hands, only shake hands with one person. And then right away, if you have an odd number. And then you as the coach know, okay, now I have to be with that person. If you teach the serve first, you can look around and go, okay, who can be my helpers here? Who's a little bit older? Who's been here before? But I think also, again, to set that up, we used to use the term visual demonstrators. Everybody in a program should be able to demonstrate. It could be done in a lobby. That's group dynamics. Someone's coming in, you're showing people around a tennis facility, and say, hey, Johnny, come here for a minute, shake hands. And, you got to teach kids to shake hands. Shake hands. Look the kid in the eye. Introduce yourself to the parents. I have a problem with that. I think it should still be Mr. and Mrs. Jones. I think to call a coach, not call him Jeff or Mary Ann, but call him this Coach Jeff, Coach Mary Ann. And you already touched upon that with discipline. With the Czech system, we have a pretty extensive library. I went to Czechoslovakia, the former Czechoslovakia, in '87. Arguably, for me, what country is the best for teaching tennis? I mean, there's certainly other countries that could be mentioned. I don't think right now that we would be very high here in the U.S. on the list. I think with Canada, I think, my position on Tennis Canada for a long time, very good on paper, but overrated because they've had some hungry immigrants do really, really well. And then, people outside of Canada think that there's so much great tennis teaching going on in Canada. But I'm pretty close to quite a few coaches and spent a lot of time in Canada and teaching Canadians but I think that getting everybody on the same page, what they used to do in Czechoslovakia, used to get all these kids on an athletic field. Of course, what they would be doing is selecting who they wanted to teach. At that time, Eastern Europe, here in the West, we cater to people who are wealthy. In the Eastern European system years ago, or say the Soviet system, they cater to people who are talented. And the Soviet system didn't really allow for a second chance or late maturity. But they would take ping pong paddles, the Czechs, and they would cut the handles off the ping pong paddles, and they would tape, to the dominant hand, someone's right-handed, they'd have, a ping pong paddle on both sides, on the forehand, the palm, the backhand, the knuckles. And, they would actually teach tennis out on a field. I think that's so important where you could teach tennis in a parking lot. We ask kids all the time. In the group dynamics, let's say a facility where you can have 24 people on a court. And years ago at Dennis Vandermeer, that was something that people studied for. I don't know. I'm a member of the PTR and have been for a long, long time, was a tester. I don't know if that still exists, and I should. I'm just not active enough with that organization. But you used to have to be prepared, and that was on the test. You would have to write out how you would teach 24 people at one time in a gymnasium.
Right.
But with hundreds of kids on a soccer field, that's not going to be that. It's not going to be taking up court space, and to have beginners toss balls back and forth. We say, okay, you're going to be the baseball player because maybe that's for someone a little bit older. A younger kid will say, okay, you're going to be the human ball machine. And, toss underhand, and that's a skill set. Just teaching people how to toss, and before they start whacking balls, they're going to just toss, catch, toss, do it right-handed, now do it left-handed. Then you can be clever. So, okay, let's see, hop on your right foot, catch the ball with your right hand. Now hop on your left foot and catch with your left hand. And then the number of ways you can do simple drills like that just keeps growing and growing. It's kind of like asking someone, and you can do that in a classroom. You have 25 students, and you put a paper clip on every desk and say, okay, ready, go. Write down as many ideas as you can come up with for the paper clip. It's guaranteed that the kid who is probably going to do the best with the aptitude test or have all A's, it's a pretty safe bet they may not come up with the most ideas for that paper clip. But if you haven't done it, you haven't done it. That's where, someone like yourself, just think of all the years where, okay, rainy day situation. We're outside, we're using all these courts, and you've got to go inside. And all the courts are taken, maybe perhaps by an adult program. Okay, where are we going to take these kids? But I think that people have to put themselves in position where it's not a rainy day plan. It is a plan. It's not like, okay, now it's a crisis and this is what we're going to try to pull off. And many times what people end up doing is, okay, let's sit around a TV and look at some pros hit the ball.
Right.
And that's
it.
Let me just finish on that. Sorry. So that's like, the kids would go home and just look at YouTube clips. We have all sorts of content that tennis players don't study, but they really should. It's one thing. I put this on a Facebook post today, is that I would say that a lot of people have a shallow understanding of what Braden contributed to tennis teaching. So the opposite would be a deep study of what Vic Braden did. And it's just amazing. Like, have you read this book? And the answer is no. For us, I train tennis teachers. Everybody has to. These are like the commandments. The dimensions of the court and physical laws dictate stroke production. No coach's opinion or any unique theory. I don't think people really think that you need to know 7,200 square feet in relationship to group dynamics. I think a lot of people think of that as, 78 versus, 78 down the line versus 82 and a half feet going cross court. Go ahead, Richard, your turn.
Yeah, so see, that's because time is of the essence here, and I really want to. I made a list of variables: group dynamics, large group, cultural development, right? So where it can be done, what is the outcome? Is it a social setting you're trying to develop? Is it a community give back scenario where young kids are going to have a chance to give back? Up here in Canada, at the high school level, the kids are under contract to do community hours by the time they graduate, and a lot of the times the kids aren't really forced to document the work they do. They just have to get a letter signed by a group leader. But I think Tennis Canada, Tennis Ontario could help monitor community hours, volunteer hours that high school students have to produce. The other benefits, deep reflective learning, for a club junior program, and the last thing, I think it's just a more inclusive way to promote the sport. To really have a good group dynamic development program versus just a tennis program. And you're talking about high performance all the time, or you're talking about competitive players all the time. I think that's something that the association, me, club leaders should get behind. Is that we have to produce better programs for larger groups, whether we produce lesson plans or information and lesson plans, or it just has to be done. So here's my list of variables that I've got. I've got large groups, and let's say large group. We're going to use a number 25 just to start the conversation. You've got variables with camps, rainy day programs we talked about, staff shortages, court and space shortages. More people show up than you expected for a particular social program. You've got odd and even. You've got people arriving late. You've got safety issues. Then you've got different levels of motivation, competitive play, entry-level play, ages, adults and juniors. You've got space variations. In other words, you've got courts that are higher or lower in their setting. So you've got, topography issues. You've got staffing issues with experience to none. Your audience, the forum, who are you speaking to? You've got equipment variables, balls, rackets, targets. And then we touched on a little bit is, feeding. How do you get the ball moving? Who feeds? Is it self-feed, cooperative feed, toss-in, catch-in? Those are the variables that I think that, if it's not going to be done today, obviously, but if a good group dynamic program is developed, a lot of these things are touched upon and accounted for in their design. So I think that it's something that, this is not going to be the last conversation, one of many for me. I mean, try and meet with a number of other people to get the ball rolling here, but it is something that, as I spoke to you about, I think it's a good way. I'll go back to the word inclusive to get more people involved in tennis in a meaningful way. So I'll leave you with that, Steve. Certainly, I don't have all the answers, but I appreciate your time today. Really, I do.
No problem. With a few more things to touch upon on this end before we sign off is Elaine Mason in the 1950s. That's where, again, the history of tennis teaching. It's said that to really know your subject, you need to know the history of your subject. But one thing that's faded away, I don't think it's extinct in this country, and with our fact checker, so many states here in the U.S., the United States, don't have physical education classes, but Elaine Mason, PE teachers with pride. Okay, I'm going to teach this sport for this 6-week unit at a time, and how was that done? And then the history is that many people, that was their instruction. That was their instruction, and you touched upon that. It wasn't private lesson after private lesson after private lesson. That I think many times the tennis coach is just taking a subservient role on that, where I'm not really a big believer in the private lesson. I know a lot of programs will say, well, if you want to get technical or individual attention, you got to take a private lesson. One thing I remember telling someone where I was training the pros at this club, and he said, well, what would be on your wish list? And I said, see those rafters? One time we made a video, you have to dig it out. It was film of Don Budge, Rod Laver, Pete Sampras, and Roger Federer. And the similarities were so much the same. It's like you were saying the other night.
Mm-hmm.
Take the top 10 players from the 70s, top 10 players from the 80s, and keep going all the way to where we are today. Far more similarities than there are differences. But so you have, if you could look up on the rafters, and it's an overlay where you see, how Don Budge was at the contact point, and Laver, and they're not violating physical laws. The strings are facing the target. They're sideways. They're swinging from the shoulder. It's all there. And I do think that there's too much me, too much marketing where, this is my secret sauce. This is what I've added to the game. And, other sports aren't like that. I've said this one time in a USTA meeting with a bunch of coaches, and, I said, what should be done with little kids? And said, we need to have form tournaments. And then the next thing would be to have target tournaments. And we do that with our tiebreaker test, but have prizes. But then to have posters. Earlier today I read an article on Serena Williams, obviously so many Grand Slams, and Roger Federer, so many Grand Slams. And there's nice things being written about, their farewell, having retired from the circuit. But if you just were to take both of them at the impact point on the serve, where are they on the forehand? With, granted, one player perhaps is, say, more refined, where Roger Federer, technically, we're going to agree that he has a better backhand volley. If we get it at the impact point and how long a hitting zone it is. But, and again, especially when the kids get a little bit older, they really look up to the professional players. One of our students, I talked to him, he's sending some coaches down here to be trained not too long ago, Ryan Fleming. And what he was doing is he took the idea that we had for years, and we show slides. What we used to do, and there was no Getty images, and we weren't doing anything but just using it in-house, is we would take photos of pictures that were in Tennis Magazine. If you remember that large office I had on the Tyler Junior College campus, right up at the line of the ceiling, I had at least 12, maybe 16 photos. I could just tell you it was okay. It was Vilas with his racket face closed, getting ready to hit a one-handed backhand, or where it showed the palm down of the serve, and it was just all the best players in the world showing something that was fundamentally sound, where you could see basics. And you can't, when the pros, they play so fast, to actually slow it down. So, what are they, where are they at the impact point? What's really happening out there? But Ryan, he certainly had some student assistants, but they would look at some video of the pros, and then they would go out on the court. And he was doing exactly that with, I think the number that he was using was 24. And, you can have a larger number, but, kids regulate kids too. And I think also too, if we like to do a program where it's train like a junior. I talked to someone on the phone about that today, is how's it go? Treat the kid like an adult and the adult like a kid. The adults want to have fun. They want to get out there and they want to learn. And I think also too, one point to make is having the tennis court be convertible. You can convert, you can put up these portable backboards, but you can take them down. You can have the teaching aids, but you can, stack those. You can take chairs, and you take a rubber mat so you don't damage the court, and you take stacking chairs, and you have an instant classroom. You can roll out, especially indoors. You can roll out a TV. There's so much you can do with indoor court space. But I think also too it's so important with group dynamics that people need to be able to see it. What's out there for props. One of the best exercises that you can do with a kid, and they need to. And again, I've been so much in the kid business. I'm pretty much in the lane where I train goal-oriented players or I train coaches. But just a wall, could be a curtain, could be a fence, it could be the mesh that divides the courts. And you just go up and you just are going to take your racket right along the wall. You just turn and have your palm go against the wall. You go through the power line. If people go back and listen to, like, say, our podcast on the serve, we have many videos that people could look at to get a visual on it. To use the lines on a tennis court, to just to have people be able to use the alley, to use the net. You could put the throw to the racket on the net, and okay, we're going to shadow swing the volley. I think before you even get to the racket, though, you need to be able to interrelate. Okay, catching a ball, with your palm. You can catch a ball. That's basically your forehand volley. Dennis Vandermeer used to have people just hit a backhand volley with their thumb, just tilt their hand to the outside. But I think not only what's actually out there, but then to have teaching aids. George Basho, rest in peace, George Basho. He was a school teacher for a long time. He was so dedicated to the USPTA, and he would show up in Tyler, Texas, where we broke records training the most amount of USPTA pros at one time, year after year for a while. And he would have an entire basket filled with teaching aids. For us, and I think that, we have to go back. What's your goal? Well, I'd like to do what I'm doing, but do it better. I think as tennis teachers, I have to say, okay, we're doing this worse now. It used to be that every tennis teacher, they'd have a clipboard, the type of clipboard. If anyone was ever stopped by a police officer and got a speeding ticket, they have that clipboard that they can open up, and there's quite a few documents in the clipboard. But to have a goal sheet, to have a skill test sheet, but have a grip sticker. It's amazing how kids, they go through tennis for years and years, and they don't know the grips. And there's so many stories. I mean, there's like, say, Ken Rosewell. I saw a film of Ken Rosewell. I saw one with Pete Sampras, and they said, "What grip do you use?" And they kind of looked at the person interviewing. They grabbed the racket and said, "This one." They couldn't really articulate what grip they used, and I do think that's part of the tennis circle, tennis society, that we automatically assume, to make an ass out of you and me, that we assume that the tennis teacher, or I should say that the better the player, the more they understand about their sport, and that's really, really not the case. I always say this with group dynamics, you get a cone. I tell kids that are out college bound, show up with a ball hopper, show up with a cone. Obviously, you have to have a skip rope, all the things. People become too cool for school and they outgrow that. They don't do that in other sports. You're telling me you're at a hockey game the other night watching the Leafs, and what Sidney Crosby was working on. He's out there doing something in a warm up that he's been doing since he was a squirt, which means younger.
Yeah, and that was amazing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, he was just taking passes to his backhand side. I mean, he put his stick down, backhand side, and his partner just had to just hit it with firmness, and he received the backhand, received the puck, received the puck, and he must have done 20 of them in a short space of time. I mean, he found a piece of the ice where nobody else, the other guys could do their warm up, and that's what he did. And it's just, it's a habit. You can just tell. If it wasn't that drill that night, it would be some other drill the next night. I'm sure of it. I'm certain of it. Some basic drill that, as you said, he's been doing since he was a young kid.
Well,
and
for our listeners, I mean, you made it happen for me. It was a great 2 years. My kids were playing ice hockey, and I went to Toronto, and I remember my oldest son, Mikhail, he was 6, and he was on a team that won the provincial championship. And I guess they won the Tiny Tyke tournament, whatever it was called. So, and it was played in Maple Leaf Gardens. But there was a time where they were invited to Maple Leaf Gardens, and I was dumb enough thinking, oh, this is kind of going to be a really special thing. And so I took him, and I'll watch the Leafs practice. But there was literally, it seemed like the whole garden was filled. There was school bus after school bus. There was all these kids. And certainly the parents brought them as well. And there was hundreds of kids watching practice. And the goalies were practicing, which was interesting, where they both had white masks, which is very unusual. Usually they have their masks, when they're the same one they practice with, is the same one they play with. But it was Patrick Waugh, fantastic, one of the best goalies ever. First guy on the ice, last guy on the ice. And I'm going, this guy is just amazing, just working. And two goalies that are both like 6'3", and no numbers on, and it's like, let's confirm who this is. And I think that's really missed out in tennis, where we always say, okay, Michael Jordan at the foul line, somebody coming out of the starting blocks, is you always have to repeat basics. Braden used to say that about Jack Kramer. He would go out and cleanse his strokes after a match. He might shower, rest for a little bit. He's going to go back out and practice. Actually, Felix gets all sorts of people talking about that, because he does that, and not many people do that even on the pro tour, where they practice after a match.
Yeah, that's a habit in golf. They call it a cleanup. They'll play, and right off the round they'll take a break, have something to eat, quick bite. Then they'll go to the range and clean up, just do rhythm drills. The best players in the world, you just know where they're going to be right after the round. You just go straight to the driving range, and you'll see the best players in the world. And they'll be hitting hundreds of balls.
I talked to someone today who is part of the management team at a resort, and I said tennis players need to have a golfer's mentality. For our listeners, Richard, his wife Rosalind, their daughter Claire, had a Division I scholarship, played golf. And kind of a funny thing, Richard used to send her to me because sunny Florida, he'd hit some balls, but I was their mental toughness coach for her visits. But with that, golfers, they don't want the ball to go in the woods. They don't want the ball to go in the water. And I used to caddy. Didn't really like caddying. I used to just hope that they wouldn't buy me a hamburger after the first 9 holes, because you just have to sit there, and they go through misery. They go through how they did on the front 9. And shot by shot, but the scoring system allows him to do that. And I know you're a huge student of golf. I've heard someone say one time that a golfer would run through fire to take, to lower their handicap, to lower their scores. Tennis players, many times, they just want to be in a better group. They have no ability to volley. It's unbelievable now. I find myself sometimes 4 weekends out of the month, I'm watching a junior tournament, or I'm watching a UTR tournament, and you don't see volleys. You don't see overheads. You don't see approach shots. You don't certainly see conventional approach volleys. But getting people to slow down and self-evaluate, and I think that again, that expression, you can't fool a kid. If you, especially you want to create that culture where the kids are going to give back. You don't want to have kids in our junior program just be takers. They need to be givers. So you've worked with someone 3-4 years, even if it's 3-4 months, they should really be able to help out with a junior program. I would say this, idea of a group. And I think also group, for our listeners, we're not just talking 24 people with group dynamics, or a large number of people on one court. That's important too, but kids now, they're at a camp, maybe it's not an overnight camp. They're mom's right around the corner with their helicopter come in for the rescue, and the kid will text his mom, and I'm in the wrong group. I tell young coaches as I train, don't answer the questions. Don't answer the questions the way I do. People will ask me, who's going to be my child's group? I go, that's a dumb question. You got another question? Are you really going to improve your forehand based on who you're standing next to? Now, right. If you really can argue, say, oh, yeah, okay, fair enough. If you practice with better players, the ball is going to come deeper, faster, a higher level frequency. So, yeah, you're going to shorten up your ground strokes, and it will help you to practice with better players. But, I just am baffled by, people like I like an ice hockey player. I just want to get on the ice. I just want to touch the puck. I just want to stick handle. And when the best hockey players in the world go back and talk about what they did, many times they're playing shinny. It could be on the pond, and it could be 30 people of all different levels playing with one puck, and they're just happy to be out there. I was in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. My kids went from your place to playing hockey for Little Caesars, and tennis people will get up at 4:30 in the morning, and they're to get their kids on the ice. And
I mean, hockey people, yeah.
Hockey people. I'm sorry, hockey people. But they're anyway in that Grosse Pointe area, beautiful place where there was certainly some tennis facilities that became hockey rinks because at that time there was just more passion. To me, I think it's a young player that you worked with for a long time, Aiden Malik. It's a fantastic story where he's got people getting up in the morning. He's 12 years old and he's got his buddies. Misery enjoys company. He gets his buddies getting up and they're practicing. And it's a lot tougher in your neck of the woods to get out of bed in the morning. It's freezing outside, and oh boy, get out, and especially if you have to scrape the car. But here's one story of group dynamics. Tyler, Texas. This was not in place by the time you got there. It was a beautiful campus to your school. There was an old gym. So the old gym was the first gym. And actually a tornado just touched down, and the old gym was right next to the tennis courts. It really just damaged some of the tennis fences, but the gym was demolished. But what was in that gym was mirrors on all four sides. It was a very small gym. And it's like an elementary school. Still to this day, you can go to an elementary school gym, and it's the stage on one end. I mean, it's a cafeteria. It has multiple purposes. But the Apache Bells, I've mentioned this on the podcast before. They went to the Super Bowl twice when I was there. They went to the White House twice. They were a big time program. But they trained in front of a mirror. And there's really, to me, there's only two out-of-body experiences. You're being videotaped, you're looking at filming yourself, or you're looking in a mirror. Dave Anderson has these mirrors from dance studios where they're portable and you can move them. I know I've been to some golf studios with you where, there's certain types of mirrors that are pretty much at ground level that a golfer will use. It's just baffling. Braden used to say, back in the day it was, here's my $20, now it's $100, but here's my money, don't mess with my strokes.
Right.
And that's amazing with, but let's wrap it up. With group dynamics, I do think that if I were to say one thing is, if people really understood what the pros were doing, you had, you can now do it through emailing people at home, sending a text message. I do think that a tennis director that has a staff, they should be sending very brief content to players to look at. And, to say, well, like Roger Federer, no one's been filmed more than Roger Federer. No one in tennis has ever had their picture taken more than Roger Federer. And people are so confused on how he hit a forehand. That old question, are you going to teach what's happened or what's happening? Like what happens, use the term truth. What happens at the moment of truth? Where is the racket face? And you can't see it with the naked eye. How far does that racket track out to the target? And, go with the best and forget the rest. I mean, what do the very best players do? It was taken down on YouTube, but Djokovic's physical trainer, not one of the coaches, but one of the physical trainers, Dusan Vemic is somebody who's reached out, and he certainly likes what we're doing with GreatBase. At one time, he was coaching Djokovic. But the physical trainer was just going over the body balance positions, and when kids will end up hitting a forehand, they look like they're hitting a pretzel. They look like a pretzel. I've been in quite a few academies here recently. I have an interesting experience with academies because a lot of times people will come to me, have some film done, like it's a second opinion. And it's like, well, you've been at that program for how long now? But it's amazing. All these little kids, they have the old Bud Collins. It's not a Western grip, it's a Hawaiian grip. I mean, that, Robert Lansdorf, they're hanging on the racket like a frying pan. But the ball's hit over their head, the racket face is vertical, and that's all they're doing is hitting forehands. And it's game-based training. What you and I do is static balance. In other words, standing in one place, stationary tennis teaching. That's almost obsolete. That's almost extinct. You almost never see that anymore. Hey, kid, come here for a minute. Stand right here and do this. And, for us, if we didn't have players at the other end that have become very accomplished and have film of that, or we have some beginners come in and they look to the left and look to the right and there's someone that can beat them badly, that helps out. I've always said for years, people don't go with science, logic, or imagery. They just want to know who wins. So anyway, this game-based training, the kids are banging forehands, and it's a live ball. The coach is on the sideline. I'll say the so-called coach, the imposter. They're pretending that they can coach. There's no coaching going on. They're putting a ball in play, and they're having fun. But the light at the end of the tunnel is a train coming right at them because they're not developing, the basic skills that lead to special, basic shots, specialty shots, emergency shots. But no, I think it's very important. I think the opening though is that it would really service tennis. It would be watering the plant, and the plant needs water if the grass is going to grow. That tennis teachers are trained to teach beginners and do it in a setting where it's community, it's culture, and everybody's involved.
I believe that. Long-term development, man, that's for the sport. I really, really, I'm passionate about that. I think that it's, like you said, I mean, in some ways, because tennis teaching is so subservient, the private lesson has become, it's a do of evil. It's really Band-Aid training because there's no information being transferred for the most part. And private lessons aren't specific on skill development. If you don't know skills, if you don't know, how to train skills, it's just Band-Aid training. And when it comes to game-based training, it's outcome-oriented, 10 in a row, by any means necessary. Well, in the moment, perhaps, but 5 years from now, you're going to have to rebuild that. So you've just spent 5 years of your life to rebuild your game. 5 years later, it's the economy of time. You just wasted not just money but time and opportunity. And I think that's you touched upon where to start. For golf, for that matter, most junior programs start with putting. The last shot in the scoring shot, right? They start with putting, then they do chipping, then they might get to full swing, and that's just how it works for the most part because you get more people around the putting green. You have control. They learn the discipline of listening, focusing on what the coach is asking you to do. And I think tennis you've tried to invoke too much activity, too much entertainment, and not enough education. And I think you have to take a deep look at that because if court time's a premium and two people go out on the court for an hour and the level of exercise is minimal at best versus two skilled players that would hit, triple, quadruple, 10 times the amount of balls, the unskilled player will hit in 30 minutes, which is a better workout. And that's the argument you got to have. How well is your time being spent when you're playing? Listen, pickleball is it's now the enemy of tennis, and you're getting 16 players on the space of a tennis court where you can get 4 players. And I got some feedback from somebody who went to Hilton Head, where Hilton Head used to be a mecca of tennis. It's now becoming, the mecca of pickleball. And guys are taking weekend trips to Hilton Head to pay $40 an hour for a group training lesson where they're just teaching you to score, how to score in pickleball, how to start the point. And so pickleball is certainly attracting a lot of people to play, but it's $40 a head for 16 players on one court with one coach. Do the math, and it's going to attract a lot more attention. It's going to attract a lot more interest from club owners, and that's our battle. So that's another front. That's another issue we've got to tackle as well. Is we will lose people to pickleball. I was at a club the other evening, just helping a young kid out, and they had a pickleball program. I couldn't believe the number of people that showed up for the pickleball program. Just couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. So, and that was on 3 tennis courts. So, I mean, I just think that, we've got to do battle now with all these distracting sports that are going to take away from tennis. And I don't buy the argument that it'll get more people involved in tennis. I just don't. I think it's the reverse. I think more people are going to leave tennis to play pickleball because it's easier, it's more social.
I'm sorry, I interrupted again. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
With pickleball, we've touched upon it so many times. It's invading tennis. With pickleball, we can't beat them right now. We got to join them. And I really think that, it's a fact that the best pickleball players are converts, or they were very good tennis players at this point. I see it every day. I live in walking distance to a park, and it's packed, and it's not just old people. It's younger and younger people. It's fun. It's festive. It's a different sport as far as instant fun. Tennis has got a much slower learning curve. So no, we in tennis have to do exactly what you're talking about. It's like, okay, how can we do a better job? And we need to get the people that are having so much fun playing pickleball. Hey, we can teach you how to play tennis. And the people that are out there, the people that are teaching pickleball, and what do I know about pickleball? But they're making it up as they go along. It's amazing to watch people that are teaching pickleball. They were tennis coaches for the most part. They have the hitting skills, and they're just making it up. They're just making it up. But fact-based instruction for long-term development. What I've said about private lessons for a long time, you might as well just turn on the tape recorder. You've already told the kid, get the racket below the ball. Keep your head still on the serve. And, that's where, piano teachers, do you have a tough piano teacher? But a lot of kids still working piano. Take your one lesson a week. Because one-on-one, in a lot of ways, you can't argue with one-on-one. Okay, it's very effective. One-on-one is great. So much attention. You can focus on this and that. But it's cost prohibitive. Dennis Vandermeer used to say private lessons would bore him. That, through people I've been trained by, I say, okay, someone's got a stroke. I do this. And, Braden was somebody, I'm very confident to do this. You've seen me do it time and time again, where I'm training a group of people and have an audience and say, oh, yeah, come on out. And you can just fix their forehand, fix their backhand in like 2 minutes. Like boom, boom, you see the flaw, it's diagnostic. There's a flaw, there's a cause to the flaw, there's a cure. But then the whole challenge is, okay, we've shown you how to hit the ball efficiently. We filmed it. It looks so much better. But then do they have the character? Do they have the drive? Do they have the common sense to go, okay, I got to practice now. I got to unlearn the old. Vic used to do that where, he'd get the person hit the ball really well and say, well, that's still not good enough. Still not good enough. And I used to tell Vic, I was flattered one time where he was at the Roosevelt in New York, and he said that I had been at more of these tennis teaching conferences than anybody, which I don't know if that was true or not, but I was way up there for being a tennis conference junkie. And what Vic was doing for a while, he goes, well, does anybody want any help on their forehand? And that was so much better than him talk to me. That was much better than him talking about brain scans and brain typing and this, that, and the other thing, because his intellectual curiosity was off the charts. People can learn so much. You can grow myelin by watching people play 3-on-3 basketball. I used to take some older kids, taking you guys to watch some basketball players play. You're going to play, you're going to get beat. We're going to sit there and wait, and you're going to play at least twice. But you're just going to watch these guys play 3-on-3 basketball. Yeah, we have some students that, they should master a second sport. I mean, I'd say a majority of our students. Kobe Bryant, you're teaching a 3-year-old. People should study the late Kobe Bryant. You take a basketball. You don't get a basketball that's a smaller size. It's regular size. The kid's 3-4 years old, and you stand one step from the basket, and you go months and months, and now they consistently are getting the ball in. And you go, okay, now take one step back. That's how you say, okay, that's how you teach basketball. Pickleball, I really think that we should be clever in tennis and say, okay, learn tennis technique and then go play pickleball. And then right away they can get that rush. They're in a social setting. Welby Van Horn didn't teach the serve. He didn't teach the beginning players to serve for a long time. He waited and waited to teach people to serve because he didn't want kids to compete at a young age. He wanted them just to go out and do mini tennis, not go out and play sets.
Right.
When Welby Van Horn taught the serve, I was just baffled. Here's this guy who, arguably the best combination of being a player and a teacher in the history of the game. And I'm talking about being a teacher, someone who took a beginner and took them all the way to a really advanced level, like say a Charlie Passerelle. But Welby would teach body balance, the hands on the hips and 3/8 system of balance, very much like how you golfers end up. From the ground, heel, hip, and head. And then he would tell kids, put the racket in the tray position. And he'd say, just toss and tap. So he was teaching a palm-up serve. But by doing that, he was teaching balance. He was teaching a low toss. The kid wasn't everywhere. And he said, now what you just need to do is change from the beginner grip to the championship grip. I one time was giving a tennis lesson to my sister-in-law. And, she asked me like on a Saturday, and she had to go to a function on Sunday, and she had never played tennis before. And I said, okay, this is how you do it. You get the ball in the box every time. You just put your racket in the tray position, just toss and tap. And you watch kids serving. I do think this is something to share with the GreatBase people that follow the GreatBase. They're doing too much with body rotation. They're just over exaggerating. From the ground up. And then when we actually look at their front foot, they're on their toe. They haven't really turned on the ball of their foot.
Right.
But again, I think with group dynamics, you got to agree on the ready position. You got to agree that we're not going to let kids have an Hawaiian grip. And again, from Bud Collins, the Western grip, it's kind of unusual that term comes from California, where the ball bounced higher on the hard court than on the clay court. You think, well, you read this, but it was more prevalent from players in California years ago playing with a Western grip, like a Don Budge changed his grip, won the Grand Slam in '38. And so that's Western. And, if you go to California, you got to go a long ways to get all the way out to Hawaii. So that's where late Bud Collins, funny guy. Some people didn't like him because he said, "We hackers." And Bud Collins had won a national title playing mixed doubles. He was a very competent tennis player. But I loved his line. There's two types of tennis players: those who played at Wimbledon and those who don't. And the Stephen Covey line with group dynamics, it applies to everything, every aspect of life. Begin with the end in mind. We're going to teach the ready position. This kid is eventually, they're 6 now, but they're going to be 16. That's 10 years from now. And we have to know, as you said, long-term development. Where's this, how's this movie going to play out? How's this going to work? And if people be brilliant with basics, if they don't work on the fundamentals, in the end, it won't be fun. It won't be fun.
Correct.
Up in the Great White North, if you can't skate, you can't play. That's where when I was up there with you, I studied skating, and I got myself in the back. I picked out Yari Beriski, and I know you went with me to watch. And he's a legend now. I mean, he's trained so many NHL players, and it's just like basketball. Coaches, John Wooden. When are we going to scrimmage? The great late Wooden from basketball. You just work on fundamentals, and with hockey, I used to think, when are they ever going to put a puck on the ice? you're just going to skate and skate and skate, and then you drill and you drill and you drill, and it's also you can be able to play the game. I mentioned Caleb Hyatt, who was here for a couple of weeks. He says it quite well with talking about how people are learning to play tennis. And it's like they go to the piano and they just start pounding some keys. They have no clue what they're doing. And obviously they're not producing music, but then if the piano teacher taught like the average typical tennis teacher, they just go, yeah, it sounds pretty good. Just keep on doing the same thing. And it's just not going to work out. It's just not going to work out. But I think also too, Billie Jean King, you got to see it to be it. If people haven't seen tennis be taught, and I would say that there's a lot of young people that are in the game now, they really haven't seen tennis be taught. Yeah, if they wanted to dig on the internet, they could. I mean, there's a new website that comes out every day, and Vic Braden used to say, now it's I think 30 years. So much bad information goes out so fast. Everybody and their brother can, and that's why we're driven to give out free content. It's like, no, it's just, here are the 7 secrets of the serve. Give me your credit card.
Right.
I've given you 3. I need your credit card to tell you the other 4. And
right.
WC Fields, there's a sucker born every minute. The strength of the individual will come out. There will always be individuality. People say, well, you're teaching everybody the same. You just got to know what your critics are going to say. That's why, at your club or the club that you came to visit, Rochester, New York, and Toronto, they're not too far apart. Coming back to Julie Scott, pre-post, she was a palm upper going into the 7th grade and no strokes, basically. It's all documented. And, Gail Scott was smart enough to go, okay. I can remember when the USTA contacted them and go, we would like to coach your daughter. And she said, no, we're fine. And, we have so many people that we've coached, and the people that I've coached to coach where, just because they're going to go to the governing body of tennis, who's got all the bells and whistles, maybe they have some money, maybe they have some wild cards, all the political side. But what's the formula? The formula is very simple. You have to conquer fundamentals. And, granted, you have to be innovative, but you've got to be able to imitate first. And, no one's arguing like, well, you're making me learn the alphabet. The little kids, they keep singing the alphabet. And their young formative years, it's not too cool school. They keep singing the alphabet, but then they own it. And there's no argument. This is A, this is B, this is the sound, this is the shape. But no, I think it would be very good if you had some demonstrations on film, so that when you sit down with people, I think if you're just talking to people about it, it becomes abstract. If you can actually show them, it's more concrete. And if you could just show them demonstrations, I just know some kids in Ontario that, through you and Miran Mann, I'm currently still working with, and they are great visual demonstrators. They have a foundation, and, they're on their way to be excellent tennis players. But someone who you know really well, Carl Hale, I think he says it well, to really market yourself in tennis, you got to be coaching marquee players. And that's Dennis Vandermeer, Caca de Toros, Sugar of the Bull. And the sugar of the bull is that, well, just because you're sitting courtside and that merchant of flesh, there's so many people. This past weekend I saw legends of the game, Grand Slam champions, I should say majors, top 10 players in the world watching junior tennis, but I'm watching them watch their students. And it's like, okay, what's going on here? And, granted, you might just be working short-term with a player working within their game, but it's like, well, that forehand, that backhand, there's holes in their game. And, I think many times what programs are doing, and I think that's the same thing with what you touched upon, a private lesson over and over again. It's like you're romancing the player. That happens during the college recruiting process. How much can you suck up to this kid? We'll give you this, we'll give you that. I think the college recruiting, the parents should be looking for the coach saying, you're not very fit. You're not very fast. We need to get you in the gym. We need to get you on the track. I think too many college coaches are telling the kids, okay, you can join our team in January. Any developmental coach worth their weight in salt is going, hey, kid, the sooner you can get here, the better. And the really best coaches know that the kid really even should take a redshirt year because they don't hit the ball very well. Richie, baby. Richard Hernandez.
Sure.
Time to check out. Anything? Last closing comment? Are the Leafs going to win the Stanley Cup?
The Leafs will win the Stanley Cup, not this year, not next year, but you've got to wait for Matthews to mature to like 28, 29. I think that's just the year that they seem to like, I don't know why it is, but he'll be great by that age. He's good, but he'll be great at that age, and I think that's when we win.
American boy up there in Toronto from Arizona, pumping in the goals. Well, you're sounding more optimistic. Well, they haven't won since 1967. I thought when I asked that question, you were going to say when hell freezes over, but that town would go absolutely crazy if they win. I'm going to come to Toronto when they win the Stanley Cup. It was going to be the best party on earth.
I think they got the chemistry. I think they got the team. I just think they just got to mature into themselves. I mean, you're looking at, it's like everybody. I mean, the worst thing about Toronto is that you've got so many commentators on the Leafs that think they've got the secret how the Leafs can win the cup, and and it's nauseating just to listen to everybody give their 2 cents and then question every decision. If they turn left, they should have turned right. If they turn right, they should have turned left. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, coming back to what we were talking about the other day, I'm listening to Roddick, who I like to listen to. I'm listening to Courier, and they're talking about TFO and Fritz. And those guys, when we talk about tennis, those guys are fantastic tennis players. Hats off to those guys, all 4 of them. But you turn the clock back and say, oh, yeah, they backhand volley on both guys could be a little bit better. But no, I think with the Leafs side, the most important question, you got an amazing goaltender.
We do?
No, I'm asking. You got a great goalie?
No.
So
they're unsure.
It's just like tennis. It's just like tennis. You got to have great defense. The very highest levels, as you know, the game starts with a serve, so it starts with offense. And most players have at the highest level, even with the women now, a plus on their first and second serve. I mean, Serena is serving faster than the men on her second serve. I mean, there's no secret. And our boy Patrick Monigulu, what are you working with Serena? I'm helping her with her serve. That guy is so clever. But defense, then the defensemen, consistency. We had Roger Crawford. Remember Roger Crawford? Played Division I tennis, disabled in all 4 limbs. You got to be consistent. His thing is consistency is better than perfection. But yeah, then you got to get people who can put the puck in the net. But I think now it's tougher and tougher to win because every team can fly, every team can skate. I'll sign off by saying this: is that I'm a student of tennis, and I'm a fan of hockey, and I have hockey in my blood. But hockey has really improved. Everybody can skate. Tennis hasn't really improved. I mean, granted, the guys at the very top, the equipment, but like what's going on with high school tennis, the junior development programs. If people really knew our sport, they would know that it's poorly taught. It's poorly taught.
Well, you go to golf now. I mean, most of the better players, they walk around with a TrackMan. Track everything from spin rate to smash factor to club speed to ball speed, and that for a fact. So the point is that the parity between high school golf and pro golf is so slight now. It's so close, and you couldn't say that about tennis. The parity in golf is unbelievable, right? So and women too. It's improving fast. You get high school kids that are coming out of high school literally on the doorstep of the LPGA. And you can't say that about tennis. One thing, here's a group dynamic idea. And I'm wondering if it'll ever get to this. I discussed it with my good friend Carl Hale. He goes to many of those meetings with the ATP, etc. I said, wouldn't it be great if all the slams had global qualifying at a number of sites? So you start at level 1, you qualify to level 2, 3, 4, until you get to qualifying at the actual tournament. You actually are trying to qualify to that level. From a group dynamic standpoint, so many people would tune in. So many people would prep to have a chance to play at those events. That's just an idea for group dynamics. I don't think it's good for tennis teaching, but in terms of, entry level tennis players, college players, with the idea that if one day I could just enter the tournament and improve to the point where I could play one of the slams, the day's makeup, it wouldn't happen because the tournaments don't really need it because they have great, audience and viewership, but it'd be so good for tennis. Much like the US Open. You could be in Australia and qualify for the US Open. You can be in the US and qualify for the British Open. It's not done in tennis, and it would be a good thing. I think from a group dynamic standpoint, the more you can open it up and the more inclusive you become, the better it is for the sport. Pickleball can't do that. They don't have any slams. I don't know how we're going to lose out the pickleball, right? It's just bad management if we lose out the pickleball. How do we lose out the pickleball? They don't have one slam.
Well,
Makes no sense
tennis. And I'm trying to correct myself. You were once my student. I know you've reversed that now, but the slams are now it's a major. First of all, it is a major. You have to win all 4 for it to be a slam. But I make the same mistake with.
Thank you.
I make more mistakes. I tell people that all the time. I'm making the most mistakes here. That's what a leader has to do. My mistake. But yeah,
my mistake.
So we're hitting people over the head. And I think young coaches need to be listening to these podcasts because of the background we have with all these different coaches. Jim Ryan ran a 351 mile. He had the world's record forever. There's more to the story where he got cut from every sport. He's a tall, lanky guy, ended up, the number 1, the miler. And at one time, that was a big thing in the U.S. Everybody knew your mile time. Before a PE coach would ask you your name, or a coach, they'd ask you what your mile time was. I was huge in the 70s. But he ran a 358 in high school, said he didn't know how to run. But like Carl Hale, for our listeners, he's the guy's guy. Everybody likes Carl Hale. He directs the tournament that's in Toronto. What do you guys call that? What, such and such?
The National Bank.
National Bank?
National Bank Open, yeah.
I thought it had a different name, the Canadian Open. But
it used to be the Rogers Cup. Now it's the National Bank.
No longer the Rogers Cup. But, I keep people on their toes. I talked to Carl, or I sent him a text. I guess I went through you, or sent him an email during the pandemic. Coming back to what I started with during the pandemic, there was all these people teaching tennis in their garage and say, okay, this is what you do while you're stuck at home. And it's like, bounce the ball down, bounce the ball up, roll the ball around your racket. And Carl at that time was the president of PTR. And the message I sent to him, I said, you ought to share this with the world, basically, as at that time, we still have it. It's how to practice in a garage, how to practice at home. And it's all the things that you can do with group dynamics. But then you take what you do with group dynamics, and if the people are clever, the parents are watching and go, okay, they got him hitting off a cone. Now they got him skipping rope. We can go home and do that in the basement. We can go home and do that in the garage. We don't have to just come to the tennis club to do that. We're going to look at the practice and go and repeat the practice when we go home. When I was with you, that's what I did with my 2 boys when they were learning how to skate. I went and I studied skating and said, okay, now we're going to go to the public skating and we're going to practice the moves that they showed you. That's all it is. You need to be shown, and then you got to find ways to practice on your own. But with that tape that we have, or the course, it's a young Victor Lilov. We have 5 years of content of this young guy. He was with us at the time when we were, sharing content. And he's hitting off the cone when he's 12. I should start 7 or 8. I'll get it right. He's 8 years old, and then he's 13. And, he won, the Orange Bowl, for example. He won the La Petite. He recently was in the Wimbledon Junior Final a year ago. What's he doing with his tennis now? Is he coming to the net like he used to? Has he had some different cooks in the kitchen? Wish him the best. The family made so many sacrifices for his tennis. But, Carl, he's still pretty high in the rankings with the PTR. That course should be shown. I mean, it's like, okay, this is what you need to do. And, I don't know. I mean, for me, with the PTR, Vandermeer was so outstanding with group dynamics, progressions, corrective measures, just tricks. Okay, you're doing this on your serve. And, just for a kid to keep their head still, Vandermeer, okay, put your hat on upside down. I mean, he just had trick after trick to get the people hit the ball really well. And that's what we can do with, Vandermeer's genius is we can use Braden's science. And then, you just go on and Van Horn's balance. But with, we have, we just have a lot of content that's not really ours, but we've assembled all this homework and people should take a look at it.
Well, it's like I've heard it said once before. It's just that when you go to the wells of great, remember the men who dug it. So I'll leave you with that. I think tennis needs a good kick in the pants from time to time. We're in good shape in terms of numbers, people playing, but now's the time to really, you're up in the tiebreaker, close it out, go to the net, apply the pressure, whatever it is, whatever adage you want to use. I think now's the time that as coaches, leaders, now's the time that we get creative and be more inclusive with good content, with good education, and not just placate nonsense. And that's how I want to sign off.
No, I think that's great. I think Ray Benton, he's a lawyer. I should be, maybe I'm wrong. Ray Benton, he's definitely a money guy. He's done a lot of things as an agent. He represented Braden as an agent for a long time, and I remember having dinner with Vic and Ray, and Ray had a list of 50 people, influential people in tennis. And obviously there's a lot of great people on that list. I think of Wayne Bryan. There's just so many people he had on that list. 50 is quite a number nationwide, just here in the U.S. But I think also, though, is, you can get 50 different people, but really when it comes right down to it, let's get a curriculum. Let's get a curriculum that we're going to have, these 10 principles. And everybody needs to know core information. They need to know the court. I know Andy Fitzell made a presentation once at Fair State, and then he made the same presentation at Fair State. I'm not sure if they still have their tennis teaching program in place, but I talked to someone the other day. Unfortunately, their enrollment's way down. But anyway, Andy made presentations, USTA, Tennis Teachers Conference, and Fair State. And he just went through it. Okay, the court, boom. The racket, boom. The grips, basically that goes with the racket. And, then it's just, body balance, shape of the swing, what are the variables? And so it's not, I don't think it's a matter of getting all these, qualified people that, they've coached these, not Grand Slam champions. They've coached all these kids, all these players that have won majors, that, typically in tennis, the person who's coaching someone at the finish line was not there at the beginning. I think that's great about Alcaraz, where his father's a teaching pro, and Juan Carlos Ferreira. I think that does take place in Spain so much better than most places, where the person who's coaching at the park and rec is respected. It doesn't mean that you have to be at the fancy resort or the big commercial academy to be respected. But I think it's a more just core information. Can we agree that the tennis court is a huge factor in what happens to a tennis ball? If all of a sudden the tennis court was circular, then I might agree with the way people teach the forehand today. But it's a rectangle. It goes north and south, and I think that your swing should go north and south. I don't think that your swing should be going east and west.
Mm-hmm.
But Richie, it's always good to talk to you. Toronto Maple Leafs will sign off. But group dynamics, I hope our listeners
Steve, thanks
got a
very
lot
much
out
for
of
the
it.
time.
Oh, thank you. I think it was a great
Thank
topic.
you.
I'm glad you agreed to have this conversation be a podcast. But we'll chat again
Thank you
down
so
the.
much.
Look forward to seeing you down the road. All the best.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Adios. Hockey, Toronto Maple Leafs. Anyway, listeners, there's going to be a quiz. We know we have some people who tell us they've listened to every podcast. If you go 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and the information that we share, it's not ego-driven. It's been acquired through a long journey of studying tennis. But great to talk to Richard Hernandez. I hope you got something out of it. It was fun. Thank you very much. Good night. Adios, amigos.